Welcome to all. All of us know that whether it is in a formal setup or informal setup, learning is taking place, whether it is incidentally or accidentally. In today's discussion, I will focus upon the theories of learning and the relevance in adult learning. When we listen to the term adult, we know that their ways of learning is different. So how to approach? So whether it is a child-centered learning or adult-centered, the theories of learning has some implications upon this adult learning. This topic is part of the course Understanding Adult Education, which is one of the course of adult education, Master of Arts in Adult Education. So what do we mean by this adult learning? So whether it is learning or adult learning, we can define it as a process which brings about a relatively permanent change in the individual's behavior because of the result of knowledge, practice, or experience. When we look at the adults, we know that they are joining to the program with a basket of skills, expertise, knowledge, and everything. They have some kind of experiences. Then, during the process of learning, they acquired some knowledge, and there we can see the reflection or the feedback of the learning through a permanent change in behavior. So here, in theories of learning, today the focus will be upon the three theories which can be called as learning by association, learning by conditioning, and learning by insight. So these three theories, when we look at it, we know that this learning by association, it was put forward by L. Thorndike, learning by conditioning by B.F. Skinner, and learning by insight by the Gestalt psychologist. Let us have the discussion of each theories in some detail. Here, as stated, the American psychologist L. Thorndike put forward learning by association. He stressed the importance of reward in forming association or connections, as he used to call them between stimulus and response. So here we can see that stimulus and response is important in this learning by association. The term association determines the two elements, the association between the two elements. What are the two aspects, that is stimulus and response? So here a connection is between the stimulus and response. So based on this, L. Thorndike proposed three primary laws of learning. Let us see what are they. The first law is known as the law of effect, the second one the law of readiness, and next the law of exercise. So the first law, when a response to a stimulus produces a pleasing effect on the organism, the same response is likely to recur when the same stimulus comes. Here the connection between the stimulus and response gets strengthened. So when it occurs in the opposite manner, we can see that response may not recur when the same stimulus comes. Let us discuss with one example is that, suppose in a classroom, a teacher is asking question and the student is trying to reply. That time, the behavior of the teacher, instead of encouraging the students to give the answer, if the teacher's gestures or any oral statement give negative reaction to the students, then the students will not respond. So that is an important thing, that a positive response should be given to the students. So when the connection between the stimulus and response gets strengthened, then only their response will be in a positive way. And when a response to a stimulus produces annoyance to the organism, the same response is not likely to occur when the same stimulus comes. So here it is an important thing about the law of effect. Next comes the law of readiness. So in this law, it states that when any conducting unit is ready to conduct, to allow it to do so is satisfying, not to allow it to do so is annoying. Vice versa, when any conducting unit is not ready to conduct, for it to do so is annoying. So here we know that especially in the primary stage, always we are looking at the law of readiness as an important aspect. For a student to go to school, to enter into his studies. So the law of readiness is an important thing. So when an organism is not ready to do a particular thing and compelling, it won't work. So what is important is that always we have to check the law of readiness of the people. That's why we know that during the last hours, how much difficult to handle a class, because the law of readiness is becoming less. Then comes the law of exercise. In this, we can see that when a modifiable connection is made between a stimulus and response, other things being equal, that connection strength increases if it is repeated a number of times. So here also we can see that there is a statement that practice makes a man perfect. So what is important? The practice should be given in a way that it should increases the response of the organism. But what is happening nowadays? Take the case of the school. What type of homework? When a student is getting a holiday, they may be overloaded with a lot of homeworks. So how? Whether the organism is getting positive encouragement or just doing for the sake of the homework. That is an important thing that we have to note down. And these three laws, that is law of effect, the law of exercise, the law of effect, and the law of readiness. These three have major or significant educational implications. Let us discuss the educational implications. The classroom experiences, whether it is child-centered or adult-centered, it should be pleasant and satisfactory. The teacher should be pleasant, considerate, and kind. And next thing, the periodic review of learned material is necessary. So what is important is that we can see that why in the classrooms, after teaching a particular concept, we are giving some kind of activities, we are giving some kind of homework. That is the periodic review of the content to make the learning more retained in the mind of the learners. So it's an important aspect when we think of the learning process. So the periodic review of the content is an important thing, but at the same time, we cannot give overloaded with some kind of work or activity like that. We have to take into account the law of readiness of the learners, then how the law of exercise is becoming important. And again, we can see that this proper rapport between the teacher and the taught is an important thing, so that the learner will get a positive or a pleasant climate to interact with the teacher. The classroom activities should be organized in an order of increasing difficulty so that the learners may progress with confidence and without stagnation. So what is important, that how do we organize the activities, whether it is for the children or the adults, the organization of activities should reflect that the first difficult thing we cannot give at the primary base or at the beginning stage. We are increasing the difficulty of the activity in a progressive manner. So first, for example, suppose the teacher taught a particular formula. So at the basic level, what is the simplest form of the formula may be given first. Then only the difficult formula will be given later on. Otherwise, the learner feel some kind of disappointment or rejected if they are not able to succeed. So this law of exercise, the law of readiness and the law of effect is important. So these are the important laws regarding the law of association. Coming to the second theory, that is learning by conditioning. There the term conditioning is used, and the conditioning theory of learning, it describes a form of learning where learning occurs as a result of associating a condition or stimulus with a particular reaction or response. So how do we connect a particular stimulus with a particular response or a condition with a particular reaction? And this law of learning by conditioning, this is put forward by B.F. Skinner, and we know that he emphasized two types of conditioning. What are the two types? That is the operant conditioning and the classical conditioning. So Skinner is stating that the learning means it is a change in behavior. So whether the behavioral change can be observed within the limited time, that maybe we are thinking. The change may not be a drastic change. The change may be after teaching a particular concept. If the learner is able to define it in his or her own understandable way, that shows the behavioral change, that the learner is able to define that particular concept. So taking into account the two types of conditioning, the classical conditioning and the operant conditioning, well, how these two are different, we are going to discuss about the classical conditioning. So this classical conditioning, when a stimulus is paired with something and the response is coming, hence it is also known as the respondent conditioning. So the natural stimulus was paired with the unconditioned stimulus, and the natural stimulus got the properties of the unconditioned stimulus and became the conditioned stimulus. That is happening in classical or this respondent conditioning. For example, he conducted several experiments upon the dog. So we can take one example like that. Suppose a dog was shown the food. So before conditioning, what happens to the dog? By seeing the food, and the dog is so hungry, so what happens? Salivation happens. And during the process of conditioning, along with the food and ringing of the bell. So in the first step before conditioning, food gives salivation, and when the bell rings, there is no salivation. But in the process of conditioning, when the food and the bell is shown together, there will be salivation. So this is the second stage. Coming to the third stage, when this conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus is paired together, when the salivation comes, it is the second stage, and in the third stage, simply the unconditioned stimulus, that is the ringing of the bell itself, will create salivation in the mouth of the dog. So here, what is important is that how do we pair the natural stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. It's an important thing. So learning should happen in this way, that the natural stimulus should pair with the unconditioned stimulus. Next type of conditioning, that is operant conditioning. What this operant conditioning, it is also known as instrumental conditioning. Before discussing what is this operant conditioning, this operant conditioning is based on two assumptions. Let us see what are the assumptions. So in the first assumption, we can see that the cause of human behavior is something in a person's environment, and secondly, the consequence of a behavior determine the possibility of it being repeated. So here the two assumptions stated into account that the environmental influence is an important aspect, the cause of the behavior. So it is always related with the environment, and what type of consequence is getting from that type of environment. That is also an important aspect in operant conditioning. Why it is known as operant? When we think of the term operant, we know that it refers to any active behavior that operates upon the environment to generate consequences. So we can see that how the response is coming and how the consequence is happening in the environment. That's why it is known as operant. According to this theory, when an organism behaves in a manner that results in a reward, they are more likely to repeat the behavior in the future. And when instead of reward, punishment is getting, there is less likely to occur. So behaviors followed by a pleasant consequences are likely to be repeated, and those followed by an unpleasant consequence are less likely to be repeated. For example, suppose a student did a particular activity and the student is able to get positive response. It creates more encouragement in the minds of the learners to do more, better, or to do more activity. When the student is getting, instead of reward, he or she is getting punishment, it reduces the occurrence of that particular behavior. So that's why we stated that in classroom, reinforcement plays an important role. And we know that reinforcement is completely different from feedback. Generally in classroom, teachers are giving the feedback, that is the immediate response or the suggestions that is given for a particular activity. But in the reinforcement, how do the teacher organize the positive reinforcement, or are they giving the negative reinforcement? That is an important thing. Let us see what are the educational implications of this theory. When we think of the educational implication, exercise reinforces a learned response. So that only we are giving assignments or exercises for the learners. Then providing suitable practical work that fosters many a skill can reinforce theoretical knowledge. Thirdly, positive reinforcement is a stimulus which increases the probability of desired response. The avoidance of negative reinforcement gives relief from unpleasant state of affairs. So when we think of the educational implications, we can see that how do we give the positive response and how we avoid the negative response, the negative reinforcement. So this positive reinforcement, it is a major stimulus which increases the probability of the desired response. And at the same time, we have to think that the avoidance of negative reinforcement, it gives relief from unpleasant state of affairs. So these educational implications is very much important when we think of this learning by conditioning. The next theory, that is learning by insight. It was put forward by the Gestalt psychologist, and the term insight, it is the mental process by which new and revealing combinations of data are suddenly perceived. So when we think of this learning by insight, we know that in an immediate situation, we may be getting an insight of a particular activity. So who are these Gestalt psychologists? The Kohler, Wolfgang Kohler, he has stated that the Gestalt approach, that is in observing any situation in a holistic manner. Suppose a drawing is exhibited in front of you where it consists of the circle, the square, then the triangle and everything, and a big circle. Inside there are different types of. We try to observe that particular image in a holistic manner, not partially. So the partial thing has no effect upon the learning process. Hence, what is important? The holistic approach is very much important. And here, we are giving importance for the holistic evaluation, the holistic development of the individuals, not the partial. So when we look at the evaluation process also, we are thinking of this holistic approach. And in this insight, the term insight denotes that the particular idea is coming into the mind of the learner all on a sudden. It is not learned behavior. It is coming at a particular situation based on the previous experiences. So here, the cognitivists believe that learning is both a question of insight formation and successful problem solving, and not a mechanical sequence of stimulus and response. So what type of learning should be given? That is problem solving, insight learning. So this type of activity should be given to the adult learners. Coming to the educational implication, what we can see is that for getting insight, what is important? The intelligence and experience. It is important for any learner. And insight learning is possible only by the individual's unceasing endeavor. And the learner should be encouraged to strive to reach the goal. For that, the subject matter should be properly structured and organized. So here, what is important? The intelligence will play a major role to get a particular insight, as well as the experience what the learner has. It also gives some kind of information, insight to the learner. So what type of activity should be given? That is the problem solving activity, and the activities that give insight to the learner is an important thing. So we have discussed the three theories of learning, that is learning by association, learning by conditioning, and learning by insight. So when we try to sum up that learning it's a change in behavior as a result of the instruction. So that behavioral changes happens because of the newly acquired knowledge or the experience or because of the practice. Then the three types of learning, the learning by association, where we can see the association between the stimulus and response, and then learning by conditioning, where it emphasizes the two types of conditioning, the classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and learning by insight, where it gives a holistic approach to a particular thing. So when we try to teach children what is important, that is problem solving activities, and then some activities that provide insight to the learners is important. So the approach that a teacher or a tutor has to adopt to the distant learners or the adult learners, it should be that insightful learning, where the learning or the activities generate some problem solving activities and it gives some kind of insight to the learner. It's an important thing. So based on these theories of learning, we can assure that it has great relevance upon the learning of the adults. Thank you.